Alright, it's finally time for me to cover the Impending Doom character I've been playing. I've been working pretty hard at getting all the information that I need about how the build works, and spending a lot of time putting together as good of a slideshow as I possibly can. I think this one came out even better than my first deep dive, and I'm trying to include everything that I can within reason here, so these are the things I'm going to be covering. We're going to start with the build itself and how it works, then I'll explain the pros and the cons of the build to, help you decide whether it's something you even want to play. I'll cover why we're doing Elementalist as the Ascendancy, the expected cost of playing the Elementalist variant. I will not be able to give you an expected cost on the Pathfinder variant, but I can tell you now that it will be substantially cheaper to do this on Pathfinder. However, it'll also have a lower ceiling and will not be able to perform as well as the Elementalist does in the Pinnacle endgame. And that is what the alternative section of the build portion there is covering. Well, more so sending you somewhere to put together the Pathfinder if you chose to do a low budget one. That is if you just wanted to play Impending Doom. And then I'll cover the gems next, and we'll go in order of starting with Impending Doom. And when I say the gems, I mean like the things it's linked to and things like that. And then we'll go over the curses that are in the gloves, and we'll cover your auras, your golems, and what they do for you, and then like the miscellaneous stuff like a movement skill and various buffs and whatnot. And then lastly is the gear, and there will be a section of mandatory uniques, and, spoiler alert, there's a lot of mandatory uniques, and they are not cheap, so I'm just gonna get that out of the way now. Then I'll move on to the wand and the jewelry. Those two are together, and they're also first because they're all equally important. I think that those are the pieces of gear that are sort of like the glue outside of the mandatory unique. So they're the most important, and that's why I generally do order these in the gearing section based on their priority. In terms of like how much you're going to spend on it. Like, you obviously need to have all of these things, but it's about how much of your budget you plan to put into that piece of gear. So and the next is like the armor, which is going to cover the body armor, the gloves, the boots, etc. And I will not repeat, if I mention something in the mandatory unique section, I will not repeat it on its given slot in the other sections. So just clarify there. Then I'll cover the jewels, which there's only two things that I'll bring up in there, which is the cluster jewels, because every other jewel is unique and mandatory, so it starts at the top. And then I'll go over the passive tree, what I have done, and I'll pull up like an example character on PoE Ninjas just to show that there really isn't much variance there. And then I'll cover Flasks, which is very simple. And then I'll cover my Mercenary, which is perhaps not the best possible Mercenary to have, but it's been working extremely well and is not something I really felt like I needed to switch. So let's go ahead and get started. And so we're first going to just explain here how Impending Doom actually works. So it's a support gem, and it's a spell that triggers as a support gem. And the way that it triggers is if a linked curse expires on an enemy. And expire can mean that the duration ran out, or you overlap it with another curse, removing it from it. And it has a cooldown. It can store 3 uses, which is like a burst damage thing, but it doesn't really matter. But it has a cooldown time of 0.15 seconds. We get that down to about 0.09, which puts it at a point where breakpoints don't actually really matter. It really can't be hitting any faster than it is with this setup, and that's basically all that really matters. There used to be like some breakpoint math that people had to do, but we have a lot more tools for cooldown recovery. Especially with the budget we're working with, but also some new tech. So that is how this goes. But yeah, so it's a simple explanation here as to like how Impending Doom procs. But more importantly, so your idea here is like you need to get as many overlaps as possible to trigger Impending Doom as much as possible. With such a low cooldown time, you want to try to get as many overlaps as you can per cast. And that is what the gloves are for. Well, I guess I'll mention Impending Doom. You put Temporal Chains and Awakened Spell Cascade to Impending Doom. And Awakened Spell Cascade will give you 4 additional circles one in, you know, one on all four sides. So they all kind of converge in the center if you have enough AoE, and they'll overlap themselves. And so then you hook up your Vixen's entrapment gloves. This is one of the mandatory uniques. This is a cheap unique, but we'll talk about that later. Every time you cast a curse spell, which you're always casting temp chains, you're gonna trigger every curse here, and it goes in order. So Enfeeble will go first. If you like, this is, imagine a 4-link here. This is like the order in which it would rotate. So it's Enfeeble, then it goes Despair, then it goes Punishment, and then it goes Spell Cascade. And it's extremely important that you have Awakened Spell Cascade. A regular Spell Cascade is, it works, but it's just way worse. You just get half as many overlaps, right? So you like essentially have half as much trigger going on, and that doesn't work. And it's a really cheap Awakened gem. It's only like 6 divine, so just buy it. But it's important too that you also get an additional curse. You get another one from the tree, and so you have 3. You have a limit of 3 curses. So when these all have finished their rotation, it takes off temporal chains, and then your Impending Doom procs. Now it's important to mention now, because this is a deep dive, so I'm going to get pretty specific, that because temp chains is the one that's getting stripped, that means that your poison is not hitting them while they have temporal chains on them. AKA you're not getting the damage bonus that temp chains would normally give, but you would naturally be like, okay, let's use Enfeeble on the helmet then, because you want it to strip the weakest curse for the build. But the issue is there's like a synergy later in the build that basically requires us to be using temp chains, and Enfeeble would give us nothing. So there is an explanation for that in case you were smart enough to think about that. But that's just the situation we're in, so it's not a solvable problem. And then, yeah, so it does a shit ton of chaos flat damage, base damage, and so what you do is you just make it poison, and there's a few ways that you can do this. The easiest one to grab, because we're already going to grab a Curse Mastery at some point, whether it's the Whispers of Doom wheel or the like Hex AoE wheel. Anything that you have cursed will give you 20% chance to all the elemental stuff, but that doesn't really matter. But also to poison, so that's 20% of your poison right there. And it's important to mention that you won't see this on the tooltip, because it's a debuff on enemies that causes it to give you 20%, so you're not going to have it in your tooltip. So that means that no matter what, your Impending Doom tooltip will only need to be at 80%, because you have that extra 20 from the curse effect. But yeah, so these are like the 4 best ways to get poison chance. Serpentine Spellslinger I'll mention first, because it's a free wheel near the Witch start. Which we'll go over later, but yeah, you don't have to like do anything special. This is just where you already are for CI and stuff. It's over in that area, so this is one of them. And it's not actually the notable itself that gives spell poison chance. I think it's 10% from the first node, 15% from the second node. So you get 25% from this wheel. But obviously this is like massive damage multiplier too, so it's really good. Septic Spells is from Medium Cluster Jewels. That gives you 20%. You can use more than one. Like if you wanted to make up for a lack somewhere else of the poison on hit, then you could just use 2 Medium Cluster Jewels and get 40% from there. Toxic Strikes, which you will not be able to reach through your passive tree. This would be an Anoint. This is the most commonly used one. But I found that it's just more efficient to, if you have the money and you can afford to lose the intelligence, to just use the 5% chance to poison on hit tattoos. Just use 3 of them in place of this. You'll have to probably use some of these regardless, but then add an extra 3 of them to replace Toxic Strikes with a different Anoint. So yeah, so that's how this works. That's how you proc your Impending Doom, and then you just make it poison, and that's your damage. That's where it all comes from. And because you're proccing Impending Doom so many times per cast, I don't know the number, it's kind of hard to say, but it's a lot. Enough to get you to dot cap reliably. It feels really good, and the ramp is really fast. But here are the pros and cons. And this is pretty, like I thought about this list quite a bit. And these are the things that I really found myself enjoying and not enjoying about the build. So first of all, first but not most important, it's chaos damage, which just, you know, is nice because you can automatically ignore any kind of reflect in the game. The monsters naturally have lower chaos resistance than elemental resistances, and on top of that, you can scale damage off of Withered. So like chaos damage just feels kind of good in general in a lot of cases. It's not You can't do the proximity shield thing because it's not damage over time until you've already hit them with damage. So like the proximity shield is still extremely annoying though, for the record. You have explosions because we use Profane Bloom, Forbidden Flame, and Flesh, so that's extremely nice map clear. It's a very, very fast build actually, and has massive AoE that covers over your entire screen. It is a god tier mapper for sure. If it weren't for the map mod sensitivity that I'll cover in a second here, it would be a like top tier mapper, 100%. It would be doing risk better than most characters can. But it's also really, really tanky. There is one weakness of its tankiness, which is just like a barrage of hits, which I put in the cons over there. But yeah, if it's just like a barrage of stuff, not like Maven Spell Cascade, but more like, I don't know, like, what's that thing called? The Katarina move where she like sends out her skeletons that you have to walk on. I don't remember what it's called or what she says, but like if there's like a remove mod on the map and that thing is hitting you, like that will insta-gib you, as it would most characters, but it's kind of hard to explain. But it's just like if you're getting rapidly hit like 20 times in a second kind of situation, then you're completely screwed. Like it's like the one weakness. And you might be able to fit in some kind of Ghost Shroud tech with some evasion, but I'm not sure. I tried to look into ways to do it and it seemed really inefficient. But yeah, so what you do get is crit immunity for an extremely low cost. It's just a poison mastery. Your action speed cannot be modified below base value. Same with and movement speed, which is part of one of the unique jewels we used. You have a pretty good chunk of armor. My character personally has 32,000. You get 90% to all resistances, but it's actually better than 90% to all resistances because if there's a source of negative cold or lightning or a penetration modifier, cold and lightning damage will not be affected. So, and I'll go into detail about that later, but it's basically because we're converting all of our elemental damage we take into fire. And so cold damage can only penetrate cold resistance, and lightning damage can only penetrate lightning resistance. And so when a cold or lightning damage hits you, even if it has like 100% penetration, it will not penetrate your fire resistance. So that's nice. And then obviously your CI, so Chaos Immune. And then the cons are that it's poison. If you've never played poison before and you are like play crit builds or something, it's going to feel kind of weird, but the damage ramp is technically a con of poison. And a second con of poison is that it is dot capped at 38 million DPS. This is a hard-coded thing into the game that they cannot fix, apparently. So no matter what you do, this is the highest amount of damage over time you can deal with any damage over time in the game. So you're limited to 38 million. And then the vulnerable to barrage thing I just mentioned. But you're also somewhat map mod sensitive, and I want to go into slight detail here about this. So if you are running map mod effect on your Atlas tree, and you roll any of these modifiers, it really sucks. Poison avoidance, if it's that'll scale up to like 90% with enough map effect. That's cringe. That's 90% less damage, so don't do that. Less AoE, it depends. Like for my situation, I have AoE on one of my rings to make up for this modifier. You can run this usually if you have AoE on your ring as well, but if you don't, it gets kind of weird because you lose some overlapping. It's still runnable, but it's just kind of cringe. Spell suppression just actually does reduce our damage by about 50% if they have 100% spell suppression. I didn't expect that to work. I would have assumed that poison would calculate before suppression, but apparently it doesn't. Chaos resistance is obviously just really annoying, and there's not very many ways to lower chaos resistance. We are basically using the two ways that we can, as far as I know, which is just despair and curse effect with, and then there's a helmet on my Merc that does -10. I don't really know of any other way that would work, but it's like, what am I going to do? Equip an original sin for no reason? And cooldown recovery, the less cooldown recovery rate modifier. So all of these are bad, right? Okay, but here's the thing. If you're running the map effect stuff, and let's say you're doing risk farming, this is something I learned later, like late in playing the build. This is really cool. I was like initially thinking like, okay, this is going to be a horrible risk farmer because these mods screw it so much. But if you're running risk and risk rolls these modifiers, it's not scaled by your map effect. So that means if it rolls poison avoidance, it will be 50% every time. If it rolls less AoE, I think it's 25% every time. Spell suppression, 50% or whatever the base value is every time. Chaos res, 30%. And cooldown recovery rate, I don't know, like 40. So those don't get scaled. So you're actually guaranteed, if you don't have these on the actual map itself, you will not be completely screwed. So just keep that in mind. If your character's strong enough to deal with like the base value of these modifiers, then you are good to go with risk farming. But you just have to get to that point. Okay, so that's that. Let's talk about the Ascendancy and why I pick Elementalist and why this is the best of them. So obviously this patch, there's some new things with Elementalist. Most importantly, the Liege of the Primordial, notable passive skill. It is extremely valuable. You get it for 1 Ascendancy. It only takes 2 points to get it. You get +2 to max number of golems, and that means you get up to 3. And the buff of them is increased by 100%. Most of you probably already know this tech, but I'm just going to explain it anyway. You don't ever have to resummon them because they automatically resummon after 4 seconds, and they're immune to LE damage. And I have a thing when I talk about the golem skills later, I will have the numbers of what they give you after these buffs will be listed there. It is extremely powerful, and there is a lot of synergy with Impending Doom through these golems. And then there's Bastion of Elements, which is just generally like a really nice feeling node. Normally the cannot take reflected elemental damage feels really good for an Elementalist, but we don't deal that damage. So we just take it for the actual Primal Aegis itself, which I think is doing like, I don't know, what is it, like 1500 damage that it can take or something like that. I don't actually know the number. I don't really care because like you're not going to min max for it. It doesn't really work like that. So I just use it and it's great. I suppose I could tick it in POB and see what difference it's making, and then use Shaper of Storms because it's a flat 25% damage multiplier. However, there were times that I was getting up to 50% shocks on certain enemies, which I didn't really understand because I'm using Deadly Ailments, so the hits are really small. So I'm going to assume that shock is calculated before that support gem is factored. So that's interesting. And then you take the Shaper of Flames Ignite one here because anything that's ignited by you, which you'll always ignite as the thing reads, will have 40% of their fizz damage converted to fire, which is a huge, huge boon in mitigating physical damage, especially because we're going to have 90% max fire res. So all of these are extremely nice for this build. All right, now I'm going to mention the expected cost. And like I said at the top, I don't play cheap builds. So, you know, I'm just going to say it now. If you want to come here and look for a cheap build, don't, like, just run away. Like, this is not the place for you. Now, in my eyes, this is kind of a cheap build because it's, like, less than a mirror. So, but here we go anyway. So, going to get this right out of the way. Mage's Blood is required. If you try to do this build with Mage's Blood, you're going to have such a bad time. It's not worth it. You're going to struggle so hard to put this character together because you're going to be missing there's so many uniques on this character that like you're not going to have room for all the stuff you need. You even like you just need the ruby flask to be scaled like it is. Like that alone is too important. So like just you know, don't even ask. You need a Mage's Blood. All right, you just do. So there you go. You need to awaken spell cascades. And that's going to be like 13D. They're not the most expensive thing in the world. You need a Forbidden Shaco. Don't go lower than level 32. It just gets kind of cringe and low damage if you go below 32. I paid 200 Divine for level 35, which is the highest you can get. And if you're going to get in a Forbidden Shaco, make sure you're buying one that does not have another gem that would brick temporal chains. Okay, so if it's like Blast Chain Mines or Spell Totem or something like that, or Cast When anything, that is going to brick your temporal chains and you can't use it. So don't let people scam you. Check to see if it's a support gem that will brick temporal chains or not. And then you also need to have Profane Bloom, Forbidden Flame, and Flesh, which at the time of recording this, those are the prices for the jewels. I actually bought them at 10D and 30D, so I got them for way cheaper, but it's going up because that's just a natural thing to happen in the league. You can expect to pay 80 to 100D for those in combo. But if you don't have Profane Bloom, you're going to be cringing out of your mind, and it's going to be a terrible build for the maps. And then there's Bound by Destiny, which is completely required at this point because of a single mod. And this is some new tech that is extremely effective that I'll cover later in more detail. But that's at least 28D for getting the cooldown recovery rate as well. And then the Balance of Terror, which is one of the coolest uniques about this build, and there's no way that you'd want to play it without it because it's just such a quality of life kind of thing here. You got to pay 20D at least to get both of these mods, but we are using temp chains at all times, so you'll always have both of these buffs. One of them is cooldown recovery rate, which is obviously just nice, but then the action speed can't be modified below base value is one of the most appealing things about playing a Trickster or about playing a Juggernaut. It feels really, really good. Especially the more high tier mapping you're doing, where it's just like you have Delirium that's constantly slowing you, or there's just like Chill on the ground that's like really annoying if you're not running Purity of Elements, like all these things. It's just it's annoying, like being hindered or maimed or whatever. All that stuff, this stuff is always hitting you, and it's like if you can tank all you want, but at some point you're gonna get so annoyed. Oh, and the petrification statues, though, you can ignore those. Like, it's so nice. Okay, and then on the right side here, like there's just a couple things that are like specific. So there's cooldown recovery boots, which I'll cover later in the boot slot. You can expect to pay around 35 div. I'm assuming you can probably craft one for cheaper, but I don't really care for that crafting process because I'm not spending so much money on this that I need to like craft it. It would be not necessary to do so. And then your gloves, you have to have Shaper and Hunter influence on your unique Vixen gloves. Which costs approximately 6 divine to make yourself, and it's a guaranteed process. There's no risk to it. So do not buy them off of the trade site because people are listing them for like over 20 divines and they're just trying to take advantage of people that don't know this. So, and I will show you how to do that craft later. And then you just kind of want to, or you kind of need a high energy shield body armor. I would spend more than 20 div on this if I were you. I would try to get like 1200 plus, at least, because your energy shield number is hard to get anywhere near 10k. Like you're kind of bouncing between like 6500 and 8500 on these Elementalist characters, but because you have so much mitigation on your other defensive layers, like each point of that energy shield though is even more valuable than like some other character that like stacks energy shield, right? So I got my character to almost 8500 and it has felt so smooth since I got to that number. So the more you have here, like it's very value. And so I have the total cost here. It's at least over 450 divines to get this character set up. Do not skimp on this. If you want to skimp on it, just do the thing I'm about to recommend to you, which is the Pathfinder Impending Doom, which has been around for much longer. Elementalist had no synergy pre 3.26, so this is what everybody was playing. Some people were doing Occultist, which was much similar to the Elementalist version, but most people weren't even using poison. It was like a crit thing. But this one is extremely budget compared. You don't need Mage Blood because you're playing in Pathfinder. You have Mage Blood at home with Pathfinder, and you can see the effective HP of these people. Now, obviously, if you know how PoE Ninja works and how these effective HP pool numbers work, you know that these people are wearing, all the people with 300k plus, they're wearing Svalin. And the people who don't have the 300k plus, they are not wearing Svalin. And this is just true. If you don't believe me, go click these characters, and you'll notice this from like all kinds of different builds. This is very typical, but Svalin is technically affordable in my eyes. It's like not that aspirational. You can get it under 100D. You can pick that up. That would be turning it into a very solid mapping build. You can even see one person is actually doing CI, which I didn't even look at his character, but this is probably extremely similar to what the Elementalist sets up as. But you know, go check these out if this is something you want to do. Watch Subtractum's guide. It's very thorough. It's very good. This is how I found out about it when it first was coming up, and I played the Pathfinder variant. It was extremely comfortable. I played it in hardcore. If it was super tanky, it was super nice. Plus, you can take advantage of Progenesis on Pathfinder, and that feels really good. But yeah, you can get this one up and running for like under 100D for sure. So this is the video. If you want to go make a cheaper version, because Impending Doom looks so sexy and fun to you, then go here. And that's the end of it. Okay, I'm not going to make any budget stuff for the Elementalist, forget it. Okay, so we'll move on to the gems and their links now. So this is your helmet link with Impending Doom and your temporal chains. So this is the helmet, this is how it reads. And we went over this earlier, that you just want to make sure that this top modifier isn't something that'll break your temp chains. Make sure you get at least level 32 Impending Doom, because the level is extremely important. And then you link that with temporal chains. You just put that in the helmet, it automatically links it to it. And then you run Awaken Void Manipulation, which is a pretty cheap gem usually. I think for level 5, 20 quality, it's like 5D or something like that, maybe less. And then Awaken Spell Cascade we went over earlier. And I would like to add a note here that when you're using Temporal Chains, it is a spell, even though it is a spell, which means you can take the caster mastery for opening chests, which is super meta right now, because it's nice for the abyss risk farming with like the hordes that spawn. It's nice for expedition, for all the crates that pop up while you're killing stuff. And then strong boxes, it'll automatically open strong boxes. And delve, if you like fracture a wall and there's like 3 things to open, it'll automatically open those. Or if you go into the like city tiles and you go down and like there's a bunch of chests that are like in an area that you can loot, like you also just like sit in the center of that and it'll open all of them at the same time and just feels really good. It's just nice. But it's also important, I guess, to mention that Void Manipulation doesn't do anything to Temp Chains and Spell Cascade doesn't do anything to Impending Doom. So these are completely separate. Spell Cascade is for Temp Chains and Void Manipulation is for Impending Doom. They don't do anything to the other skill. And then in your gloves, we went over it earlier, but yeah, you have Enfeeble, Despair, and Punishment. They're all linked to Spell Cascade for the combination that we mentioned earlier. And this is not something that is flexible. This is exactly what you set up. And the auras that you'll use are Flesh and Stone, Arctic Armor, Purity of Fire, Determination, and Malevolence. And I want to just add that if you find a merc that runs Determination and you'd rather have the merc with Determination, then you can do that. But I personally like getting Malevolence because stacking Malevolence effect on your merc is like a more efficient thing than stacking Determination effect, because like you don't really care about armor that much, but you care about every single possible way to stack your damage, and you wouldn't really stack Malevolence effect on your own character, so you'll always get more Malevolence effect out of your Mercenary because you can just fit it in so many places. So that's just a real quick thing to note there. But Flesh and Stone is just a generally really good aura. It just makes us take less damage. Arctic Armor, we are always standing still when we're ramping our poison. We're just self-casting, so it's just a really, really solid less damage taken thing here. Also, it's important to mention that you get less fizz damage taken, but it also gives you less fire damage taken from hits, and you have to remember that we're converting all of our elemental damage taken to fire. So Arctic Armor has some big synergy with this build, and is absolutely a mandatory aura. And then obviously you run Purity of Fire because you're just only stacking fire resistance, and you need it for the Watcher's Eye mod. And then yeah, these 2 auras are kind of up to you where you get them, but I think that you should get a Malevolence merc over a Determination merc. And then for the Golems, here's where we have all of the stats on what they actually give you. And it's important to also mention that you end up with 4 max Golems because there's a notable that we take near the Witch Start location that gives us +1 and also gives us 40% increased effect of the buffs, which gives us a total of 140, which is 2.4x. And so these are the Golems you'll use. Chaos Golem gives us dot multi scaled up. It does 38% dot multi and it does 40% chaos res. We don't care about the chaos res, but the dot multi is incredible. Flame Golem scaled up gives us 69% increased damage, nice. 48% increased AoE. Those are both extremely synergistic with not only our Curse Aura overlap, but our damage with Impending Doom and Poison and our explosion damage, AoE and damage. Like this is the most synergistic thing of all of the things here. And then Summon Stone Golem, which gives us 252 life regen, which we convert to ES regen using Zealot's Oath. And then we have 48% increased global defenses, which scales our energy shield a lot and our armor a lot. And now there's an optional gem. Here you don't need to use this golem. Like I personally use it because I didn't have to use clarity anymore for the minus mana cost on a Watcher's Eye. So I put this where the clarity was, and then I ended up having this too, which is just a kind of like a nice little extra attack speed and cast speed and mana regen, which you don't really need because your mana costs are so low. But yeah, these are the golems. They're so valuable, and it's important to remember you don't need to summon them again once they have died. They will summon automatically after 4 seconds. Here's 2 pages of miscellaneous gems. They are socketed either in your wand or shield. By the way, I have that listed here if you're curious where they're socketed. I did put where they go under here, so this is the automation links that we use. You just use Convocation because it just helps keep your golems alive. It's pretty useful while you're bossing if they keep walking into some degens and shit like that. And then you have Molten Shell because we have a good chunk of armor, right? So this is the best guard skill to use. You can use cast when damage taken, I suppose, if you wanted to, but then you wouldn't have the automated convocation, which isn't game ending. It's not like that's some kind of terrible thing, but this is just the most comfy setup that I found. And this is the other 3 miscellaneous ones. Flame Dash is my movement skill of choice. It's probably just the best movement skill you can use, especially because we're using Withering Step. If you use something like Frostblink, you can't use Flame Dash after using Withering Step, which is kind of annoying, but because Flame Dash has charges, it for some reason lets you use it after you use Withering Step. Withering Step is the most important of all the miscellaneous skills, however. It will give us 15 Withered stacks on enemies, like bosses, 100% of the time. Once you have 20 quality on it, you get 8 Withered stacks for each use, and because we have so much cooldown recovery rate, the cooldown goes to less than 2 seconds. So that means that you will always have 100% uptime, 15 Withered stacks on enemies. Because it's also instant cast, which means you don't have to stop doing anything to press it, so you'll just like press it while you're using your temp chains. So it's very easy to maintain. And then there's Frost Shield, which is just, if you've used Frost Shield before, I don't really need to explain it to you, but it's just a thing that you put down on the ground, and it will like degen some of your energy shield until it reaches max stages, and once it's at max stage, it has like a certain amount of life, and it will take 20% of the damage dealt to you while you're inside of it, and the enemies inside of it is taken by the Frost Shield's life before you. And if they're outside of the Frost Shield, then it ups it to 60%. So it's a really nice damage mitigation thing, and because we have such great cooldown recovery rate, you can spam the hell out of this in fights. It also gives you a little bit of spell crit, which I will mention, because since if you have Tailwind on crit on your boots, then it technically is useful, but not really that useful. But it's also important that we note that we have so much ES regen that when you place this, you don't even notice the energy shield loss. So you're just getting all of this for free, essentially. Feels very nice. All right, we'll move on to the gear, which is the longest portion of this video, of course. And there's a lot to cover here. And I have up here the Bound by Destiny thresholds, which what that means is we have a jewel where we want to have at least 2 Shaper items equipped and at least 4 Hunter items equipped. So as we go through these gear pieces, this number will update to make it even easier to keep track of which gear you're supposed to have the influence on. Okay, so these are the 3 like core, I would suggest, like core mandatory uniques. Like I said earlier, Mage Blood, you just have to have it. Whoops. Mage Blood, you just have to have it. There is no exceptions. You just have to have it, okay? And then Forbidden Shackle, obviously, and you just want to get as high as an Impending Doom level as you possibly can for your budget. I wrote here, like I personally paid 200 div for my level 35, and that number does fluctuate a lot. And then your gloves is the Vixen's Entrapment, mandatory gloves, and it's also mandatory to have them Shaper and Hunter. You have to do this. And the process that you have to do to get these, and I'll just like flash it on the screen here, is you buy a base that is embroidered gloves, okay? And it has to be embroidered gloves, and then you can buy another pair of gloves, doesn't matter what it is. And you put Shaper Influence within a Shaper Exalted Orb on the embroidered gloves, and then you get either a Hunter Exalted Orb or you use like another Exalted Orb and reroll the influence on your Hoarder Crafting bench. Just, you need it to be Hunter. And then you take the Hunter item, with an Awakener Orb, you slam that into the embroidered gloves. Make sure the embroidered gloves are what you click last, because that'll make sure that that's the one you keep. And then you take them to the bench, the crafting bench, and you use the reroll, the rarity of an item, a non-unique item thing. You just spam that as long as it takes to get the unique upgrade, because there's only 1 pair of gloves on the embroidered gloves base, so you're guaranteed to hit Vixen's Entrapment, and that is how you get Shaper Hunter Influence gloves. And they're not corrupted or anything, they're still just gloves, but now they have Shaper and Hunter Influence. And so, you know, whatever the cost of the Exalt Orbs that you buy and the Awakener Orbs is how much it will cost to make this. There is no other cost, and so any trade listing that's over that cost is a scam, and they're almost all over 20 divines, so they are just trying to take advantage of you. Do not do that. Okay, and then next, this is like the defensive trinity here, is what I like kind of call it. So you have to be wearing Dawnbreaker for this to work. It's mandatory, and you have to have at least 20% on the cold and lightning damage modifiers here. That'll give you 40 well, I guess it gives you 20% of the, we need to hit, I'll just say it like this, we have to hit 100%. Okay, we have to hit 100% of cold and lightning conversion to fire. So we've got 20% here on this Dawnbreaker shield, and then you need a Watcher's Eye mod. While affected by Purity of Fire, you convert another 20%, and it has to be 20. Okay, these have to be 20. You can't settle for lower. And then the Bound by Destiny Jewel, which is the new tech, converts 10% of elemental damage taken as chaos damage with 4 Hunter, which is why we need to hit this threshold, because that covers the last 10% that we're missing, which I'll go over the other 50% that's missing on the next slide. But this is the final touch, and it's actually better than converting to fire because it's converting it to chaos, which means it's completely removing the damage. We're chaos immune, so it's very, very nice. This is a very efficient modifier for this build, and it kind of like really puts the whole thing together. This is the same, by the way, there's this item, Sublime Vision. If you roll Purity of Fire on that, it's worth 1.5 mirrors. This combination is doing the same thing that item is doing. So you're talking about a 1.5 mirror value effect that you're getting for less than 50D. So yeah, that's the power of this. That's why it's so good. And yeah. But here's the missing 50%. If you were wondering, you need to get a Lethal Pride with the Rockiata. All that matters about the Lethal Pride, because there's not really any useful modifiers like seed modifiers that you can get on a Lethal Pride. You just need the Rockiata so that you get Tempered by War, and you put it here, and you click Hexmaster, which is what's originally here, and you replace it with Tempered by War, and that gives us the missing 50% of cold and lightning damage taken as fire damage. And it has these negatives of 50% less than cold. That doesn't matter anymore. Your cold and lightning res can be whatever the fuck number you want it to be. You're going to be taking it as fire damage, so it doesn't matter what they are. And I'll also mention, this is where I got my Corrupted Blood immunity, because the only modifier you need is Rockiata. There's a lot listed for, I got mine for 5D. I can't imagine you paying any more than that, to be honest. Like no more than 10D for a Corrupted Blood one here, which is really crucial because there's literally no rare jewels that we can wear. Like we just don't have the space, and getting Corrupted Blood on any of the other jewels is really expensive. So this is, if you want the Corrupted Blood immunity, this is the cheapest place to get it. And here's the other jewels that are mandatory. I think this is the last of them. I mentioned earlier that the Profane Bloom, Forbidden Flesh and Flame is completely necessary, and yeah, it just is. So you have to buy these. You can expect to pay at least 80 to 100 divines for these. They might go even higher than that. I don't think they'll be going lower, but they might go higher. And then here's the Balance of Terror, which I covered earlier. These are around 30D right now for that that double thing here. You can probably technically skip the cooldown recovery rate if you wanted, but I don't think you should. I think you should just look to spend as much money as I say here, so just keep that in mind. Gives you some all res too, which only matters for fire, but it's still there. Oh, this is right. Yeah, here is one of the most efficient things about this build. This is a 1 divine jewel, okay? The Light of Meaning with chaos damage is 1 divine, and Unnatural Instinct is less than 1 divine. And this gives my build and all of the other builds, because the trees are the same on all of them, 26% more damage. This is an extremely efficient piece of the gear we have here. Like, this is the most efficient, cost-effective thing that you can do for the build, and you can't skip on this. I mean, it's just too good to not have, and there's no more efficient way to use your money or your passive points. So this is a goated thing, and it doesn't just give you like poison damage or like damage for your poison. It's also, again, scaling your explosion damage. Let me tell you, the explosions on this build are nutty. You can kill like a white mob next to a unique boss, and it just like kills it. It's so stupid. And here is the really complicated text that I hope is readable for people. I don't really know how else I could have done this, but because I don't want to make another wand, it would just be kind of stupid to do that. I don't really think I would. Yeah, I'm just not patient enough to do a profit craft, I guess. But this is an example of the wand that you want to wear, and like if you can find a method of getting these modifiers, you can, you know, do whatever crafting method you want. But I think this is basically the best. And I'm not going to read through these steps because that'll just take too much time and it would be kind of pointless. If you want to craft the wand yourself, this is the list of things you can do, and this is the best possible method. So you can just follow this. I hope it's not too complicated. I hope the color coding helps in some way so that you don't just get lost in the text. But yeah, you can expect to pay like 60 to 100 divines for, I'm actually surprised there wasn't any listed for lower than this, because it's normally not 100D, but yeah, expect to pay like 60 to 100, I guess, for if you just want to buy it. And if you wanted to get one for super cheap instead for like 20 or something, then you could probably skimp out on like cast speed or something like that. It would be okay. You don't have to have the perfect wand, but it's pretty deterministic, so I think it's worth taking the time to craft it. And now we're on to the jewelry, which is the rings. And this is kind of a somewhat hot topic here because of this new ring, but we'll get there. Firstly, you can see now that we're up to 2 on the Hunter bound by Destiny thresholds because we're using 1 Hunter ring. So let's just start with that. You basically, the most important things about the ring is that, well, first of all, the most important thing is that it's a Hunter. You have to have a Hunter ring. So you got to find a way to make it a Hunter ring no matter what. And then you're kind of just looking for any stats that would help you, but the 2 I think you should aim for the most is max ES and int, because you're going to need some int on the build, because you also want to use some tattoos. So it just feels good to have int. And then you're also probably going to want some other stat. Like, for example, I have one with 50 dex and 50 int. But I also want to talk about mine because, so the area of effective hex skills is not required because we're playing the Elementalist with that natural AoE scaling from the Golem. However, it does make it so that you can run the increased AoE mod more like not the fully scaled one, but like a moderately scaled increased or less area of effect modifier on maps. You can like run it pretty consistently and a lot better with the area of effective hex skills in the ring, but you don't need it. So, but I will go over what I did to get this. I just bought the ring with these suffixes. I didn't add these suffixes. It came with it. I don't remember what the price was, but it wasn't necessarily cheap. It was like at least 20D. But I had the hex skill AoE and I had the int and I had the dex on it. And so I just reforged defense with the suffixes locked until I got tier 1 energy shield. And then I just slammed a Hunter orb. And if you do this, by the way, there is no useful Hunter mod. So you're just doing it for the influence. And then I crafted mana cost reduction, which is mandatory. You do need the minus mana cost on this ring at the very least. And then on the right here, there is 2 options for the other ring slot. Now, if you are not reaching dot cap, because your character isn't quite strong enough to reach it, then you can use this Betrayal Sting ring. And I have an example here. It's really cheap for how efficient this is. It's a very common item. 1.5 divine for this one here. Basically, you just have a percent chance to inflict an additional poison, which just gives you your ramping is just 40. For example, this one is 48%, so it's 48% faster ramp to dot cap. So it is a very efficient damage item if your character is not quite there yet. And technically my character only got to like 30 to 35 mil, so it didn't even quite hit the dot cap, but that wasn't enough. I don't care. I can deal with not having that damage, because if you choose to not use the Betrayal Sting, you can get a ring like the one I have, which gives me 73 to flat int, 25 max percent energy shield, and 54 intelligence, and minus 10 to total mana cost, which is why I don't need to use a clarity gem with Watcher's Eye mana cost reduction. So you can get a gangster ring like this. This gave me 1,000 energy shield, and it feels so much better when you have that kind of number of energy shields. So yeah, this is a pretty flexible slot though. If you don't use Betrayal Sting, you can kind of just put whatever you want there. You don't have to do anything else. So, you know, do it you will with this slot. It's not too picky, but this is in my opinion, the best option. And now we're on the Amulet, which you can see is going to be a Hunter item. So that's number 3 out of 4 for our Bound by Destiny thresholds. And the Amulet's pretty simple. I mean, it's just a Hunter Amulet, and you know, there's only 2 things that's required. You need a Hunter influence, and you want mana cost reduction again. And the reason you want mana cost reduction, by the way, is just because, like, you obviously don't want temp chains to have a heavy cost, but your gloves are also triggering all the time, right? So you want those curses, they get to 0 mana cost. You want that pretty quickly, because it'll cause mana problems when you're casting 4 skills every time you cast, right? So that's that. And then if you wanted to see like what's most important to roll past that point, if you cared, damage dot multi and chaos dot multi are equal in importance. They're like some of the most valuable things. This is my amulet I have. I got a decent one. It's not the best in the world, but it's pretty good. Percent max ES I think is the third best thing to get here, and then attributes, whatever attributes you need. And then just flat max ES is obviously good, and then resists are obviously good. And then the annoyance, you can use toxic strikes if you still need the poison chance, this is what most people use, and I think they're actually just mistaken. They should just be using more tattoos to get to the poison chance, but if you do that and you don't need the toxic strikes in your amulet, then you can either do charisma or like sovereignty or whatever mana reservation node you like, if there's some way that you want to fit things in that doesn't exist on the character currently, like if there's some changes you want to make. But I personally prefer using Disciple of the Unyielding because you get endurance charges while you're mapping, so that just, you know, adds on to even more physical and elemental mitigation, just really doubling down on what you're already doing, and it feels really good. Technically a small increase in damage too. And I will also mention that plus level to gems is a waste of time. So if you see like an amulet listed that's like this, like I saw earlier today, there was a 100 divine one that was very similar to this, but it had plus to chaos gems, and so that item wasn't worth 100 divines for me. That was worth 100 divines for someone using a chaos spell gem. But we're using Impending Doom support in our helmet, and that doesn't get affected by plus level to gems. So don't ever think of that as a positive mod. It doesn't do anything for us. And your body armor is pretty simple. I mean, you just want as much energy shield as you can get. That's it. You know, spend whatever you can to get as much as you can. And then, you know, the suffixes are entirely up to you. 6% attributes usually feels pretty good because it just helps you hit thresholds on attributes, letting you use more tattoos. Just feels good because there's a lot of tattoos that are really useful. And then the useful implicits for the Eater Exarch. The only really useful Eater one is the fizz damage taken as chaos. I mean, it's just extremely good. Like, you know, 10% less fizz damage taken is always great. And then the other 4 options for the Exarch is just up to you, whichever you find most valuable. I think probably plus to max fire res is the best, getting 2% of that, and that gets you to your 90 threshold. Or you can do increased aura effect, or you can do increased Arctic armor specifically because of how value Arctic armor is for us. And then there's also increased effective curses, which would scale your damage a bit by lowering their resistance even more with despair and causing them to take even more damage with punishment. And here is where the Bound by Destiny thresholds are finished. This is where we get 2 for the Shaper mod and 4 for the Hunter mod, where we use boots that are Shaper and Hunter influenced. The only things required here is that it's Shaper and Hunter influenced, and that it has movement speed, because you just don't want boots without movement speed. You can't expect to pay like 35 to 50D for a decent pair. And then the desired mods are cool, and I almost consider the cooldown recovery rate to be mandatory, but it's not technically. So, but desired is cooldown recovery rate, obviously as much energy shield as you can get. Tailwind crit is a luxury, and then whatever else your character needs. It's just completely up to the situation that you're in. But yeah, all you really technically need is that Shaper and Hunter and some movement speed. And then now we move on to the cluster jewels. You will run 2 cluster jewels. This is the most efficient way of doing this. The first cluster jewels is going to be like the classic chaos damage scaling cluster jewel. You can get whatever prefix or whatever suffix you want here. Chaos res doesn't do anything for us, but like if you find one that's more useful, then go for it, but it doesn't really matter. But these are just the Unwaveringly Evil, Unholy Grace, Wicked Pale trio, Paul trio. This is like what every chaos damage using cluster jewels build will use. And then we use this is like a very, very, very effective and efficient way of scaling damage for this particular build, because you're using poison, or you're using chaos damage, which increases into giving us better poisons, and then the poison damage is also scaled by chaos damage, and then our explosions are also scaled by chaos damage. So getting a 12 passive chaos damage with 35 increased effect is extremely valuable, and I would consider it to be mandatory to get +4 to all attributes, because again, hitting stat thresholds in this character, attributes thresholds, is really, really good. Because you have so many uniques, right? You have so many uniques, and you have so many items that are really hard to get perfect versions of because they're influenced, that like you kind of just want to make up these attributes wherever you can. You don't have to worry about resistances. Like, you can get all res or fire res. Like for my jewel, I did like 7 fire res, which I didn't even need. I thought I would need it, but I didn't. You can do that, but you know, because you don't care about your other resistances, you probably won't need to. your ruby flask with your mage's blood is already scaling your fire resistance so much that like you probably don't need to get anywhere else. But then like the other two valuable ones would be like percent damage prefix. You can get up to 4%. That'll give it to 5% with the increased effect, and then energy shield, I think, which can go up to like 11-ish, something like that, and that'll scale up, and that's you know, the best you can really get. And you can expect to pay 2 to 30 div depending on which you're looking for. Like if you're just looking for these two things, then you'll pay like 2 div, but if you want like damage or ES, you're probably going to go up to like the 20 plus mark. So, and then the medium clusters, you either use 1 or 2, it's up to you. But the thing that's important about these is, first of all, you want only 4 or 5 passive skills. If you have 6, you have to spend an extra point to get the things you need. But if you have 4 or 5, you don't need to spend an extra point. You just spend 4 points to get the whole thing allocated. The only mandatory thing on these is septic spells, and then one of the following notables, which you can do some other ones too, but these are the best ones. And I wanted to point out that like the generic chaos damage notables are more efficient than using like damage over time or like dot multi or damage with poison, because we also scale explosion damage off of it. So yeah, this is I personally like Vile Reinvigoration the most because that gives us percent ES, which is kind of hard to get on this build, so that's nice. All right, now we're going to talk about the passive tree, in which I'm just going to pull up this POB. This is my character. This is the POB I'll have in the description. And I'll just kind of briefly go over like where we're going and what we're picking and what we're doing. So we come at a witch, and I'll cover tattoos last. But we come at a witch, we grab a value point here. This gives us some ES, mana, and int, just kind of nice. Gives us a little more room to work with. Pretty value. Jewel socket here. And I already went over the jewels that we put in them. I'm only going to go over the ones that are giving us things with a radius. You come down here to grab some ES. You want this for mana cost reduction, and then you also get a 12% mana reservation efficiency here. Also, the mastery that you take here is just less fizz damage, take one off full energy shield. It's just nice. This is where we socket our Light of Meaning with the chaos damage, giving us chaos damage scaling on all of these notables. But this is one of the most important wheels here. You get 15% AoE on hex skills, which is really nice, and you get 2 reduced mana cost nodes over here, and then the final one is 20% reduced mana cost and a massive 50% AoE of hex skills. This is a super nice node, and it is completely mandatory in all of these hex related builds, honestly. And then this is where you get your curse mastery for that 20% poison against cursed enemies. Alright, and then if we go up from here, this is a not mandatory wheel. You don't need to do this if you don't want to. If you're not doing content that can benefit from opening chests when you cast a spell, then you don't need this, but it is nice. I mean, the AoE also just gives you even more screen AoE, and I think it technically does scale Impending Doom AoE, so there's that. This is where you socket in your 35 effect cluster jewel. I mean, like, you can do it either one, like, it doesn't matter, but here is the 35 effects one. It's the most efficient to take every single node. You can see this was mine. Mine is really good. Tier 1 on all these rolls. So this is like as good as you can basically get, except you could get something more useful than fire resistance somehow. I'm not sure what you would get, but you could probably get something more useful. But this one's probably the best. And by the way, I bought it as cold res, and I just used the harvest bench to switch it from cold to fire, so you can do that too if there's a cheaper one available. And this is where I have my septic spells with internal suffering. Again, I do prefer Vile Invigoration. I just never bothered to switch it out, but this one's also really good. It's quite nice. This is where I socket my Watcher's Eye, but that doesn't matter. We need Whispers of Doom because we need the 3 curse limit. So we just take that, and this just gives us some cast speed as well, and then slight increased effect of curses, which is really nice. Here is where the Serpentine Slinger, Spell Slinger node I was talking about earlier is, where it gives you 15% chance on this node to poison and 10% on this one, so that's 25%. I have poisons you inflict deal 20% faster because I don't need the crit immunity, and I'll explain why later, but this is the way you get crit immunity for like 1 passive point. It's so good. One of the best masteries in the entire game. You come over here, you get some Spell Leech, just more recovery, just feels good. 5% instant, of course, just always feels nice too. Here you get some evasion. You know, to be honest, I don't really need this anymore because there was a time that I was using Jade Flask with Ghost Shrouds, but it is some more ES too. And then you get some ES recovery on kill, so it's nice for mapping. It does feel good. And then this is where I have my Storm Shroud, which isn't mandatory, but if that's how you want to mitigate, I think it's probably the most efficient way while you have a Mage Blood to be ailment immune. And then if you come over here, and by the way, I will cover the rune graphs, I'm going to go over that after. This is where the Tempered by War comes in with the Lethal Bride. And then this is the Golem node. I just realized this gives another 40%, so like those numbers that I had earlier should be scaled up even more by another 40%. So just keep that in mind. Like those numbers were technically undershooting. I'm not going to go adjust them. It doesn't matter. And then we have a Withered, effective Withered, and Chaos Damage generic over here. You don't need this mastery using the Withering step, but like I didn't really know what else to put the point on, so I guess you could do 10% more chaos damage to enemies with energy shields, probably the better one to be honest. Here's some generic ES. Here's where you have the other cluster jewel. And then you take Zealot's Oath to convert all of the massive amount of life regen that we have into ES regen. We have over 1,000, by the way. The only reason this number is down is because Frost Shield is ticked. So if you want to see your actual regen, you just have to untick this. I guess it's slightly less than 1,000, but... Okay, so the rune grafts, this is the coolest one. 20% chance for skills not to consume a cooldown. That just means like 20% of the time, like you don't have to get a cooldown on Impending Doom, so it's just like even more ramping, even faster. And this will also work sometimes with your Withering Step. Like sometimes you'll just like, I advise you like click it a couple times just because sometimes you'll proc this and it'll be like instant to wither steps. So yeah, every time you press Withering Step, just like press it twice just in case you get that lucky little roll. Technically helps. And then there's this one, which is 10% reduced attributes, but it gives us 40% global defenses, which feels really good for scaling our ES and armor. Because again, there's not many places to do that. And then the last rune graft is the 15% reservation one. It makes enemies affected by the auras that we run, like so they have determination and shit, but like we don't care because we're just doing chaos damage, so it doesn't do anything. So this is just a nice free 15% reservation. And then tattoos. I have % ES on as many as I possibly could before I ran out of int. These are expensive. You don't need to do this. They're almost 1D a piece, so just keep that in mind. And then I have chance to poison on hit. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's how many you need if you don't want to run toxic strikes or an additional septic spells. So put on 7, then you only need 1 cluster with septic spells, and you don't need the anoint for poison chance. Yeah, then there's just more ES down here and over here and stuff. There was one somewhere that was different. Yeah, this one. I just put like a 2% movement speed here because I didn't need the dex. But yeah, that's the passive tree, and then I'll also just pull up a character. I did not prepare one, so I'm going to be, you know, just clicking on some random person just to emphasize how the trees are basically the same across everything. So I'm going to click Elementalist, I'm going to type Impending Doom here. You can see how little people are playing it. And I'll just click on, I don't know, this guy. And we'll open him in POB. And you'll see that his tree is identical. Except he is doing the Ghost Shroud tech. That is another thing that I'm seeing a lot of people do, but I personally didn't really like it very much. I think it seemed kind of pointless. Like, how much ES are you actually recovering? 3% of 7,800? It's just not, I don't know. To take an entire slot, I don't like using the Jade, I like using Silver, because it just feels better, you know? I like the movement speed, and I like the cast speed, it feels good. But yeah, the trees are basically the same on all builds, so you don't have to worry about that. But most of them also use Betrayal Sting, which I just genuinely think that people don't really know that they're kind of almost hitting dot cap already, and they don't need to be using this because that's really what it's for. So just, you know, for what I've found, and maybe these people are right and I'm wrong, but I'm not sure. Alright, so let's get back into this though. And then the next topic is Flasks, and I realized I forgot to include that the unique flask that we use is Bottled Faith because it just gives us 10% more damage when the enemies are standing inside of it, and we have it set up that it only procs when you hit a rare or unique enemy, so it's like always at the right time. And it also gives us some ES regen too, but this is the Flask setups you should use with a Mage Blood. The mandatory ones are Ruby, Granite, and Quicksilver. You don't want to miss out on Quicksilver. The other ones are self-explanatory, but you don't want to miss out on Quicksilver. You just want that movement speed. It just feels too good. And then obviously, for using Mage Blood, you want the 20% increased effect prefix on all of them and the Enkindling increased effect on all of them as well. And this is somewhat flexible. Like, this is one of the more flexible spots, but the fourth flask is the flexible part. I personally think that the only options here, I didn't include the Jade Flask because I'm not giving the setup of people using Ghost Shroud, so I don't think it's appropriate. But if you decided to take the Ghost Shroud route, if it turns out to be better, then obviously you'd put a Jade as your fourth flask. But personally, I use a Silver Flask. I think it just feels too good to not use. But you could also use a Quartz Flask. The spell suppression is kind of irrelevant. It's mostly for the phasing. That's what I would use Quartz for. It's nice for things like Delve. And then you just get whatever suffixes your character needs. The most common ones are Stun Avoidance, Shock Avoidance, Increased Armor, Reduced Curse Effect. I think those are the 4 that I use. And then you can obviously do Elemental Res if you're somehow like low on LE Res for Fire. And then you can also craft the Life Regen one if you wanted to, that we're also converting to ES Regen. And now the Mercenary, which just like the other deep dive I did, there's probably a better setup out there, but this one is damn solid, and I did not feel like I needed to switch this one at all, but there could be a better one out there, and a cheaper one for that matter. So the first thing I'll mention is that we're outsourcing Malevolence on my build. This does proc with Watcher's Eye modifiers. My Watcher's Eye does have the dot multi increase with Malevolence on me, so that scales that. And we also have Malevolence effect on the Amulet, the rings, and I think the belt. No, I was going to get it on the belt, but I never did. And the Dying Breath also scales aura effect. But Crown of the Tyrant, this is a very expensive helmet. It's 35 divines, but it does give -10 to chaos res of the enemies, which is hard to get anywhere else, so that's something. And then it does actually, if you have a white socket, give us a little more flat added chaos damage to scale the poisons even more. And then Garb of the Ephemeral, which is not necessary, but this does save me 1 passive point on the tree and gives the Merc a lot of survivability and also action speed for the Merc can't be reduced. Actually, no, it doesn't even work for that. So like that's just kind of a dead modifier. But yeah, that's what this thing does. Because like I said on the Poison Mastery, you can get the crit immunity, but since I have it here, I just figured I may as well just like use the point on something else, so I picked 20% faster poison. But yeah, there's a better body out there, I'm sure, but this keeps it alive at least. And then the belt is the classic Calm's Binding. I just never got the Malevolence effect implicit, but you can get that. And then I use Shaper's Seed with the Malevolence Corrupt. This gives us 4% of life per second that we convert to ES, of course. And then the rings are just defensive rings with stuff to keep it alive, plus the Malevolence effect corruptions. So yeah, Merc is pretty simple. And then there's the Dying Breath at the end. Gives us 18% increased damage. It increases the effect of our curses, which is quite nice. And it also increases Malevolence effect of the Merc by 18%. And that is it. If you have any questions, I answer any question that I possibly can. I look through every single comment that I receive. Yeah, I really do hope you enjoy the build as much as I have. And I do want to say this is the first time I'm saying it on my channel. Please like and subscribe if you got something out of this video. There will be so much more of this content in the future because this is just how I play the game. I will do a build and learn it as deeply as I can within the time period of me not being bored. And just continuously do this cycle and then re-roll when I'm bored and learn something else. And yeah. So it makes me pretty happy to see that other people actually can get something out of that process that I do every league, because I think it's something worth sharing, and it's a good way to play the game, a good way to look at it. So, thank you for watching.